Hello. So we are going to be looking at one-to-one functions and inverse function. So in order for a function to be one-to-one, first it must be a function. So remember the definition of function is that every x goes to only one y. So now for it to also be one-to-one, every y has to go to only one x. So it's just the opposite, basically. So is this function one-to-one? Well, first, is it a function? Let's just make sure. 3, 6, -5, 1. All of these are different x's, so there's no x going to more than one y. But now, look at the y's and see if they're going to only one x. Well, here, 7 is going to 3, and here, 7 is going to 6. So because of this, it is not one-to-one. Okay, so it's just like the definition of function, except the opposite. So on a graph, for you to tell if it's one-to-one, it's the opposite of function. So first, if I were to ask you if this was a function, remember you would do the vertical line test and make sure that if you drew vertical lines, you would never cross more than once, right? So is this a function? Yes. But for it to now also be one-to-one, you need to be able to do a horizontal line test and never hit more than once. Well, here we're hitting more than once, so the answer is no. So how about this one? First, is this one a function? Well, if I did vertical lines, I would never hit it more than once. So yes, it's a function. But now is it one-to-one? I need to think if I drew horizontal lines, would I ever hit more than once? And no, I would never hit more than once, which means it is one-to-one. So if a function is one-to-one, it means it has an inverse. So what is an inverse? The inverse function is a function where f of x has been reflected over the line y equals x. Hence, the x's and y's switch. Hence, the domain of f is the range of f inverse. And the range of f is the domain of f inverse. So from now on, anytime we're talking about inverses, keep in mind that the x's and the y's are switching. So whatever they used to be, you switch them, okay? So if I told you f of x was these 4 points, so that's it. It's not a continuous graph, it's just these 4 points. What would f inverse be? Well, it would be the same 4 points, but the x and the y would be switched. So do you see why whatever the domain of f of x was is going to be the range of f inverse? Because whatever used to be x's are now y's. So if I tell you something like f of 8 equals 3, remember that means that when x is 3, when x is 8, y is 3 for the f. And I'm telling you it's one-to-one, which means it has an inverse. And I'm asking you, what is f inverse of 3? Well, this is asking you what the y is when x is 3 for the inverse. But it's the opposite of the original. So if I'm now telling you x is 3, that's going to be the same as when y was 3 in the original. So the answer will be 8. So do you see how it is switched? Whatever used to be the x would now be the y. So same with domain and range. So the domain of a one-to-one function g is this. So that's the domain of the original. And the range is this. So this is my original domain and range. Now they're asking me what would be the domain of the inverse. That's what this means, g inverse. So the domain of the inverse would be the same as the range of the original. And the range of the inverse would be the same as the domain of the original, because x's and y's switch. So now, how do we actually find an inverse equation? So to find an inverse, switch the x and the y, and then get the y by itself. So f of x equals 3 over 4 plus x. Well, f of x really means y, right? So if I'm now supposed to switch the x and y, this problem would become x equals 3 over 4 plus y. So do you see that I literally just switched wherever the x and the y were? I didn't switch anything else. But now I need to get the y by itself to see what the real equation would be. So here's where some algebra is going to come in. So if I'm trying to get this y by itself and it's in the denominator, that's difficult. So the first thing I'm going to do is move that to the other side. So basically, I'm going to multiply by the whole denominator. So now I have 4 plus y times x equals 3. So I could distribute that x, but if I know I'm trying to get the y by itself, I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of the x right now by dividing it. So now I have 4 plus y equals 3 over x. And so the only thing I need to move now to get y by itself is to subtract 4. So y equals 3 over x minus 4. So that is the equation of my inverse. So really, since the original was f of x, the way you would write this is f inverse of x. Okay, so that is our inverse. So what was the domain of f, the original? Well, it was just everything but -4. What was the range of the original? Well, keep in mind, this is a rational function, and this would have had a horizontal asymptote at 0 because the bottom's bigger. So basically, it would be everything but 0, sorry, y. It would be all of the y's except 0. So what is the domain of the new one? Well, I could look over here and figure it out, or I could be lazy and just know the domain of the inverse is going to be the same as the range of the original. So because it's domain, I'm going to say x, but it's going to be x does not equal 0. And the range of the inverse will be the same as the domain. Just make sure you use y. So domain and range, switch for the inverse. Okay. If you want to try one more, you can pause it and try this one. So switch where the x and the y are, and then decide what algebra you need to do to get that y by itself. So in this case, we would definitely need to square both sides. And then you would just need to add the 3. So f inverse of x would be x squared plus 3. Okay, the domain of f, the original, the domain of the original would be x is greater than or equal to 3. Because remember, you set the inside of a square root greater than or equal to 0 and solve. And the range of f would be y is greater than or equal to 0. And so for f inverse, they're just going to switch. So the domain would be x is greater than or equal to 0, and the range would be y is greater than or equal to 3. Okay, so definitely give this some time to see if you can get the hang of this. And algebra skills are definitely going to come in handy when getting the y by itself for these inverses. Feel free to contact me and let me know if you need more help than that.